Ma'am, with all due respect, you're a tourist in flip-flops. We have procedures. Please return to your seat. The junior first officer's voice was sharp, a brittle veneer of authority over a core of rising panic. A few nervous passengers, jolted from their terror by the strange confrontation in the aisle, watched with wide eyes. The woman, dressed in simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, didn't flinch. She didn't argue. Her gaze remained fixed on the cockpit door, her expression unreadable but for a profound, unnerving calm. She simply stood there, a silent statue in a world of shaking metal and shrill alarms, her stillness a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around her. But miles below, an air traffic controller on the ground, a man who had seen everything in his 30-year career, heard the initial, garbled mayday from the pilots before they went silent. He saw the plane's transponder signal a catastrophic failure. And when a new voice, a woman's voice, cut through the static a moment later, he noticed something that made the hairs on his arms stand up, a calm that didn't belong in a cockpit during a terminal dive. It was the calm of command. If you believe that courage is not about what you say, but what you do, type competence below. The situation aboard Flight 828 was deteriorating with terrifying speed. A catastrophic dual-engine failure, a one-in-a-billion event, had turned the state-of-the-art airliner into a 200-ton glider over the unforgiving peaks of the Sierra Nevada. Both the captain and his primary co-pilot were slumped over their controls, victims of a sudden, violent depressurization event that had shattered the cockpit window. The junior first officer, Mark, was now in command, a role he was technically trained for but emotionally unprepared to assume. His bravado was a thin shield against the abyss. He barked orders at the flight attendants, his voice cracking, his eyes darting between the sea of terrified faces in the cabin and the red lights screaming on his panel. It was in this moment of unraveling that the woman, Anna, had unbuckled her seatbelt and walked forward. "I can help," she had said, her voice quiet but clear over the din Mark had turned on her, his fear lashing out as condescension. "Help? Ma'am, do you have any idea what's happening? This isn't a movie. We are professionals. Now sit down." He saw her simple clothes, her unassuming posture, and made an assumption. It was the single greatest mistake of his life. Anna ignored him. Her focus was absolute, a lens burning through the extraneous noise of his panic. She gave a single, sharp command to the lead flight attendant who stood frozen beside him. "Strap him into the jump seat." Now the authority in her tone was not something to be argued with. It was a fact to be obeyed. The attendant, desperate for a clear order, complied instantly. Anna slipped past them and into the cockpit, her movements fluid and economical. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. Her hands swept over the control yoke and the instrument panel, not with the fumbling uncertainty of a novice, but with the deep, cellular familiarity of a master. It was a language her body had spoken for years, a muscle memory forged in darkness and pressure, in simulators, and in screaming winds a world away from this passenger jet. She pulled the captain's headset over her ears, the cool plastic of familiar weight. Her thumb found the transmit button. Her voice cut through the emergency frequency, a beacon of pure, unadulterated calm that silenced every other panic transmission across the channel. "Mayday, Mayday, Flight 828. Unidentified pilot assuming command. I have the stick." On the ground, Senior Air Traffic Controller Jackson heard those words and froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Unidentified pilot" was a phrase that signaled chaos, a panicked passenger grabbing the controls. But the voice was wrong. It was level. It was confident. It was utterly devoid of fear. Jackson was a veteran of desert air campaigns and frozen Arctic patrols. He knew the sound of a professional under fire. He immediately cleared the frequency. "Flight 828, this is Oakland Center. We are reading you. What are your intentions?" The reply came back instantly, clipped and precise. "Dead stick. Dual engine failure. Unable to maintain altitude. I have a visual on a decommissioned strip. Grid reference November Echo 739er. Declaring emergency. I'm taking her in." Jackson's blood ran cold. Strip 739 wasn't on any civilian chart. It was a short, abandoned military runway, a relic of the Cold War, nestled in a high-altitude valley notorious for treacherous crosswinds. No commercial pilot would even know it was there, let alone attempt to land a crippled airliner on it. He watched his screen as the plane's icon deviated from any logical flight path, performing a maneuver that shouldn't be possible, a controlled, banking glide that bled off altitude with surgical precision, turning gravity from an executioner into an accomplice. It wasn't a crash. It was an approach. The landing was not gentle. It was a controlled collision, a brutal but brilliant act of physics and will. Anna wrestled the massive, unpowered aircraft against the battering winds, her hands and feet in a constant, fluid dance on the controls. The plane screamed over the treetops, shedding velocity until the last possible second. It hit the tarmac with a bone-jarring impact that sent a collective gasp through the cabin. Metal groaned, tires shrieked, and the fuselage shuddered violently as it careened down the short runway. Inside, Mark squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the final, fiery impact. But it never came. The plane skidded, slewed sideways in a cloud of dust and gravel, and came to a shuddering halt not 20 feet from the edge of a deep ravine. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the ticking of cooling metal and the wind whistling through the cracked cockpit window. Then, a single sob of relief from the back of the cabin broke the spell, followed by a wave of weeping and choked cries of gratitude. Mark opened his eyes. He stared at the back of Anna's head. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still resting lightly on the yoke, as if she had just finished parking a car. The sheer impossibility of what she had just done washed over him, shattering his arrogance into a million pieces. Within the hour, the remote airstrip was a whirlwind of activity. Rescue helicopters descended like great, noisy birds, and teams of NTSB investigators and military personnel arrived to secure the scene. The initial reports were a confusing mess: 320 survivors, 2 incapacitated pilots, and a mystery woman who had landed the plane. It was Jackson, the controller from Oakland Center, who provided the first critical piece of the puzzle. On a recorded line with the FAA Command Center, his voice was firm. "Listen to me. No civilian pilot could have made that landing. The choice of runway, the energy management in the glide, that wasn't something you learn in flight school. That was tactical. That was military doctrine." The lead investigator on site, an Air Force colonel named Peters, heard the recording and felt a prickle of intrigue. He found Anna sitting quietly on the wing of the crippled jet, wrapped in a fire blanket, looking like any other shell-shocked passenger. Her official file, pulled from the flight manifest, was useless. Anna Hayes. Occupation, consultant. It was a dead end. Frustrated, Peters felt a surge of skepticism. This quiet woman couldn't be the pilot Jackson was describing. Colonel Peters, a man who trusted regulations and records above all else, decided to pull one last thread. He used his secure laptop to run her name and date of birth through the Department of Defense's Global Personnel Database, a system that connected to every classified and unclassified record in the United States military. For a moment, the screen returned a simple, unremarkable Army service record from 2 decades prior. A clerk, dishonorably discharged. Peters almost laughed. A disgraced clerk? But then he saw a small, almost invisible flag on the file. An annotation. He clicked it, entered a series of authorization codes, and held his breath. The screen flickered, and a new file loaded. A file that was deep black, shielded by layers of security he had rarely encountered. And as he read, his entire demeanor shifted. The casual skepticism evaporated, replaced by a profound, reverent stillness. Name: Commander Anna Hayes. Status: retired. Unit: Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Call sign: Ghost. Combat deployments: classified. Specializations: high-altitude, low-opening parachuting, combat diving, advanced infiltration, and experimental aircraft piloting. Medals: Navy Cross, Silver Star, Purple Heart. The colonel slowly closed his laptop. He walked over to Anna, his steps measured. Mark, the first officer, watched from a few feet away, confused by the colonel's sudden change. Peters stopped before her, drew himself to perfect attention, and rendered a slow, crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded like awe. "On behalf of the United States Air Force, thank you." The story of Flight 828 never made the 6 o'clock news. The official report was sanitized, citing a heroic but anonymous crew effort. But the real story, the true story, spread like wildfire through the channels that mattered. The ready rooms of naval air stations, the control towers of international airports, and the secure forums where special operators traded legends. It became known as the Miracle on Strip 7, a modern myth about the quiet professional who emerged from the crowd when everything fell apart. The flight attendant, Mark, was a changed man. Before the official debriefings were over, he found Anna as she was being quietly escorted to a waiting, unmarked vehicle. He didn't offer excuses or long apologies. He just stood before her, his former arrogance replaced by a deep, painful humility. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "About everything." "Thank you." Anna simply looked at him, her gaze holding not a trace of judgment or triumph. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You did your job," she said. "You kept them calm." In her grace, she gave him back a piece of the dignity he had so carelessly thrown away. Her silence had taught him more about respect than 1,000 reprimands. The incident created ripples that changed an entire industry. The airline, humbled and deeply grateful, established a new emergency training protocol named the Hayes Protocol. It was a revolutionary program focused not on rigid hierarchies, but on empowering crew members to identify and utilize unconventional expertise among passengers during a crisis. It was a lesson written in the near disaster of Flight 828. Competence does not always wear a uniform. The 320 survivors, bound by an experience no one else could understand, pooled their resources. They had the tail fin of the salvaged aircraft, a massive piece of scarred and twisted metal, mounted in the main atrium of the airline's corporate headquarters. It stood as a silent, powerful monument. Beneath it, a simple bronze plaque bore the flight number, the date, and a 5-word inscription that said everything. Landed by a quiet professional, Anna Hayes sought no credit. She asked for no recognition. Aided by a grateful military and a discreet government, she vanished back into the quiet anonymity she had chosen, her legendary status known only to those who needed to know. Her legacy was not in the headlines, but in the living, breathing proof of 320 lives that continued on. 1 year later, a new class of flight attendants sat in a training auditorium. Their instructor was Mark. He was no longer the brash, arrogant officer from Flight 828. He was quieter, more observant, his authority now rooted in hard-earned wisdom instead of a rulebook. He stood before them and told the story of that day, not as a hero, but as a cautionary tale. He detailed his own failures, his own blinding prejudice. He held up a slide, not of the plane or the wreckage, but of a simple pair of flip-flops. "Never," he said, his voice steady, "judge a person by what you see. Arrogance makes noise. Competence gets the job done. Your job is to listen for the silence. Look for the calm ones in the middle of the storm. They are the ones who know what to do when all the talking is over." Legacy, the narrator might say, is not a monument you build for yourself. It is the foundation you lay for others to build upon. It is the quiet, powerful echo of a single, decisive action that redefines everything that comes after. Commander Anna Hayes never sought to be a hero. She simply was one. And in doing so, she reminded the world that the greatest strength is often the one you cannot see, the one that proves its worth not with words, but with action. There is a profound difference between the declaration of value and the demonstration of it. Arrogance is a megaphone, broadcasting insecurities to the world in the hope they will be mistaken for strength. Competence is a finely tuned instrument, silent until it is needed, but flawless in its performance. The world is full of noise, of people demanding respect they have not earned, of judgments made on the flimsiest of evidence, the clothes someone wears, the way they speak, the assumptions we project onto them. But true worth is forged in pressure, revealed in crisis, and validated by results. It needs no introduction and requires no applause. It is the quiet professional, the silent warrior, the unassuming master who walks among us, their skills hidden in plain sight, ready for the moment the world needs them most. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where silent action defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.